Baking Butterly Love. In this video, I'm going to talk about two different ways to paint on buttercream and the pros and cons of each method. So the first type of paint I'll be using is this edible art paint. It's made specifically for painting on cakes, and you can use it to paint on cold buttercream. You can also use it to paint on fondant or royal icing. These paints can be a bit expensive, so I don't have a ton of colors, but since I do have primary colors here, I can pretty much mix whatever colors I need. The next type of paint I'll be using is kind of the DIY version, made with gel food coloring and a bit of alcohol. I like AmeriColor gels, which come in lots of sizes, so I have the tiny bottles, which are great if you don't need a lot, and I also buy bigger bottles of the colors I go through the most. And I'm just using a regular plastic artist palette here to hold all my colors. On the left are my edible art paints. I have pink, green, and red. And the green I actually made by mixing a tiny bit of blue into my yellow. Now on the right side, I'm going to mix the gel color paints. All you have to do is mix a tiny drop of the gel color with a few drops of a high proof alcohol. The idea is that the alcohol helps create a paintable consistency, but it will eventually evaporate from your cake. So make sure that the gel color is completely mixed. You don't want to see any little dots or blobs of gel color floating around. And here again, I'm using a red, a pink, and a green. Now you can already probably start to see the difference between the two types of paint. The edible art paints are opaque and they have a thicker consistency, while the DIY paints are translucent and much thinner. The reason they're so different is because the edible art paints are actually a true paint, meaning they're made with pigment, while the DIY paints are essentially made with dye. So that's just a bit of the science, but if it didn't make sense, don't worry, because now we're going to show you each type of paint so you can see the practical differences. On the first side of this cake, I'm going to start painting with the edible art paints. Now it's absolutely crucial that the buttercream is cold before you start painting. I would say chill the cake in the fridge for at least 1 hour. The buttercream needs to be completely solid so that you don't brush it off while you're painting. If you notice the buttercream starting to come off on the brush, you'll need to put the cake back in the fridge and let it chill again. So for the basic flower shape, I'm using my red edible art paint. The coverage is really nice, and you can see you don't need a lot of paint to get a nice solid color. Next, I'm painting on some highlights with the pink color. The red has partly dried and it's very easy to layer the pink on top of it. It mixes with the red paint a little bit, but you still get to see two distinct colors. And the green that I mixed for the leaves seems to have a nice coverage as well. And I decided to go back and fill in with some smaller flowers. I would say that all of these edible art colors appear the same on the cake as they do straight out of the bottle. Now I'm going to paint the same pattern on the other side of the cake, but with my DIY gel color paints that I made. So the colors aren't an exact match to the other side, but I did try to get them close. I used a red, a pink, and a green again. So the first difference you can see is that the gel color paints don't have the same amount of coverage. They're more translucent and it's harder to add more color because the consistency of the paint is very thin. The gel color paints are also very bright. So this red color that I'm using appears different on the cake than what it looks like straight out of the bottle. If it was mixed with buttercream, the color would be a lot more subtle, but when it's used as a paint like this, it's very bright because it's essentially undiluted. The next difference is that you can't really layer lighter colors on top of darker colors like you could with the edible art paints. So here I'm painting the pink, but you can't really see it. So I realized I actually probably should have started with the lighter color and then added accents with a darker red, kind of like you would if you were using watercolor paints. The green looked pretty good initially, but you'll notice with the leaves and actually all the flowers that as the paint dries, it starts to look a little bit splotchy. So the color kind of starts to pool up in places and it doesn't look as even as it was when you first painted. So at this point, I decided to add a bit more detail and also compare blacks between the gel colors and the paints. So I made a black paint using my black gel color, and then I also have a black edible art paint. For the dots that I'm doing, I actually think that the real paint and the DIY paint look very similar. Finally, I did want to show you that you can use the edible art paint for other details, like I'm highlighting the edge of the cake here. So this is a bronze color edible art paint, but you could also make a DIY version of this with a metallic luster dust and alcohol, the same way that we did mixing the gel colors. So to recap, here are the pros and cons I found of each type of paint. For the edible art paints, the pros, they're ready to use, so just pour them straight out of the bottle and you're ready to paint. They have really excellent coverage, so you're not going to need to use a lot of paint. You have the ability to layer colors. The colors appear true to what's displayed on the bottle, and they dry with a consistent finish. The cons are that they're not as widely available. So the edible art paints are from a company called Sweet Sticks, which is out of Australia. So depending on where you live, if you're going to buy these online, the shipping can be very expensive. If you're lucky, like me, you have a cake supply store nearby you that sells them, and I actually got some of these on sale. They were only $5 a piece, which is an excellent deal. And then for the DIY gel color paints, the pros of these is much easier to find the ingredients. Americolor gels are readily available to purchase online, and you could also use another brand like Wilton, which is available in most craft stores. And they're much less expensive than the edible art paints. The cons of the DIY gel color paints is that they have to be mixed, so you're going to have to find that high proof alcohol and buy a whole bottle of it to mix your paint. These gel paints are more translucent and they give you less coverage. You really can't layer lighter colors over darker colors like you can with the edible art paints. The colors tend to appear different than they are on the bottle because they're so concentrated, and they also tend to dry with kind of like a tacky finish and a splotchy finish. So overall, you can definitely paint with either of these options. The type of paint that you choose will depend on your budget, the type of design you're painting, and how often you plan to paint. So if you're only painting fine or very small details, like the dots on this cake, or if you're painting lines or words, and you don't plan to do a lot of painting, I think the DIY version with the gel paints is a good choice. But if you have a project where you're going to need a lot of coverage, like you're doing a full-on painting, something more complex, or if you just plan to do a lot of painting, then I think the edible art paints are actually a better investment in the long run because you're not going to waste as much product and you're going to get a really nice finish. So that is everything about how to paint on buttercream. One thing I didn't mention in this video was painting on buttercream with buttercream, but I do already have 2 other videos about painting on buttercream with palette knives, so you can check those out. I will link those in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. I post new cake decorating videos every week. Thanks so much for watching!